Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of the Spurs Chat podcast. In this edition, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined again by broadcasting royalty, journalist, Spurs fan, and of course, host of the View from the Lane podcast. Someone who doesn't need any introduction, Danny Kelly. Danny, great to have you here. And we were talking off air 20 months since you were last on the podcast. How are you?
I'm very well. First of all, thank you very much for having me back on. Secondly, I noticed that Talk Sport is one of your sponsors. And it's the lighting I use for the radio for Talk Sport is the one that when you go to any other medium, like we're doing now, makes me look like a peeled prawn. I'm not normally this pink in real life, but overlit for Talk Sport purposes. 20 months, yeah. First of all, thanks for having me on. I love doing these other podcasts because what I've learned in the world of multiple media platforms and social media is that there are millions of Spurs fans out there, and every single one of them has their own different way of supporting Spurs. It's been a real revelation, I think, that because prior to the explosion of electronic media 20 years ago, you could be forgiven for thinking there was only one way of supporting a football club and whatever the newspapers reported. But so it's good fun. Thank you for having me on. And in that 20 months, boy, is there a lot of water under the bridge. I think you remarked it was just coming to the end of Conte's reign. Yeah. I might have when you were interviewing me, in the background now you can see, a poetry cabinet and a Spurs flag from the day they last won a trophy, which I thought I'd put up for fun. But I guess the day you would have interviewed me 20 months ago, you might have found me on the ledge of a high building from which you were having to talk me down. I hated the latter days of the Conte reign for any number of reasons, not least the fact that he clearly despised the club and everybody in it and around it. So I say there is an absolute Amazon of water under the bridge since then, Chris.
Danny, of course, that flag behind you is when the last time we won a trophy, 2008, in the League Cup. How's life changed for you since then?
Oh God, it's enormously different for me. Then I was, although in some ways, I was working in radio, doing the bits and pieces that I do to try and entertain a largely indifferent nation, and I was still living in London. So much so that after the final, it was so we got a train back to Marylebone from Wembley, as people do, had what can only be described as a monstrously nice drink up along the sort of the Euston Road. Indeed, I remember going to one little bar, the name of which is now escaping me. And look, people, if you're on the radio and you've been on television, you enjoy a kind of Z-list celebrity. It rarely means anything, except I walked into that particular bar, which was full of Spurs fans. I got a massive round of applause just for walking into a pub, which, believe me, has rarely happened to me. And the next thing I knew, I was with two friends, female Spurs fans. I'd ordered up three drinks for us. The next thing, a bottle of champagne arrived on the table. So it was one of those days. The point I'm making is, in the Euston Road, I was able to walk home. I was living in Islington in those days, where I'm from, in the shadow of the Death Star at Highbury, and quite content with myself in the intervening time since then. What are we talking about? 15, 16 years. I've moved to Ireland, where I'm broadcasting from now. Partially because I always wanted to, partially to support my sister, who looks after my mum, who, despite my own advanced years, is still very much with us and very loud and able to win the family card school last Sunday. And, like everybody else, I've had to survive things like the pandemic, which changed the way I work. Yeah. I used to commute back and forth to London. Now I do it all from here in my sort of James Bond style eyrie in the Kilkenny Hills. Got married. To an Arsenal season ticket holder, because that's of course what you have to do. The power of love and all that. Lots and lots of things have happened to me. I guess the constant thread in all that is broadcasting and trying to make sense of football and music and culture and the world, and Spurs, clinging on to the wreckage as they go over various sort of waterfalls. Always the next waterfall is going to be the one where we emerge triumphant, and of course you end up at the bottom of the waterfall with the rafting bits around you and starting to build again.
Danny, so if anyone sees you in a bar in the future, what should they send over?
Oh, a pint of lager is my favourite. I wish I had something more exotic to say, but I'm of an age where you drank a pint of lager. I'm a total race traitor. I don't like Guinness very much, and even in the 70s when I started drinking in North London, the lager was disgusting. I mean, a foul brew, which is why everyone learned to drink it with, an inch of lemonade in the top, so the famous lager top. Luckily, the brewers are caught up with the fact that Germany, Belgium, Holland, virtually every country in the world can make a decent lager, and we've kind of caught up. Oh no, a lovely pint of freezing cold lager where you can draw your finger down the frost on the outside of it, particularly after a Spurs match or something like that, is nothing. Lovely experience,
especially when we win. Danny, you mentioned there that you used to live in London. Now you're in Ireland.
Yes.
When was the last time you come over to a Spurs game?
I got to see a couple of games last season. I haven't been yet this season. I'm hoping. I have commitments to Talk Sport that will take me back in the middle of November, and if I will probably have to hold one of my friends in a headlock and go on their season ticket. So I hope to see them at home in the next little while. But I'm only getting to go and see the actual games 2 or 3 times a season. In huge contrast, earlier today I was talking to David Pleat about his new book, and I remember thinking the 86-87 season when he was in charge of Spurs, I saw all the home games, and I must have seen, I'm not a fanatic. I'm not like you, Chris. I don't miss my children's birthdays just to see a football match.
Don't put that out.
Yeah. I don't avoid family weddings to go and see Spurs, and I guess that's one of the great changes, even since 2008, is that by fair means or foul, now you never miss a game. You can see them. If I look over the top of the screen I'm talking to you on, I can see what can only be described as a gigantic television, and you can, I can watch all the games that I want to see. But there's nothing like being in the stadium, and the stadium itself. And I was someone who, since we go off on a tangent, let's do this. I loved the old stadium. There was a great deal of my money, emotional sweat, tears, blood in that stadium. And I hated the idea when they were going to pull it down. I had the enormous honor on the last day. TalkSport did the whole of sort of the day's proceedings and the other football matches from White Hart Lane. I was in the little radio commentary booths just behind the press boxes there. So I had a really front and center view of the ceremonies and the rain and the rainbow and all the rest of it. And I thought I'd never really get over the old stadium, but I'm not a Luddite. I understand why they did it, and 2 things have made it possible to deal with the issue, of nostalgia. One, I guess, is that the stadium itself is so fantastic. That's one thing. The stadium itself is something that you can look. Why would we be proud of a football shirt or a piece of engineering marvel, which is what the new stadium is? But we're human beings. That's how we are. And I guess the other one, and critically, is it's in the same spot. Whoever has that seat with a golden spot on it where the centre circle used to be, it's in the same geographical place. It's not London's most beautiful spot. It's certainly not London's best connected spot, but it's our spot, and it's where I have my football DNA. And the fact that things like the Chick King survived the building, means that it's still pretty much the same experience. And I've grown to love the stadium, and I'll get over there in November, hopefully.
Danny, we're getting comments in already saying about Chris missing his kids' birthdays to go and watch Tottenham. It was just a joke. I dragged them along with me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, in a knapsack. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Danny, let me get your thoughts on...
You're very sensitive about that issue, Chris. I suspect there has been trouble in the house, I'll be honest.
Oh, do you know, the amount of games I go to, of course, I do have to miss the occasional event here and there. It does happen. And, I have to make up for it. In more ways than one.
I'll give you another one then. When I was working for the New Musical Express and the music press, the man who did the crossword, the legendary pop music crossword, was called Trevor Hungerford. And Trevor was a Chelsea fanatic, right? And Trevor went to every single Chelsea game, home, away, and foreign trips, pre-season friendlies. You recognise the pattern, Chris, yes?
Yeah.
After 999 successive games, he deliberately missed the 1,000th game to prove to his wife that he wasn't a fanatic.
How did he do that?
Yeah,
Wow.
he did.
Wow.
He did. So it can be done, Chris. Think about it.
Yeah. I don't know whether I'd like to miss a game. It might be the key game where we actually do something special. Danny, how are you feeling as a Spurs fan right now?
A bit confused. First of all, let's get it into perspective. Compared to where I was 18 months ago, or the last time I was on here 20 months ago, I've got what I wanted. Not we've got Spurs back, but I've got a team that wants to play on the front foot, attacking, attractive football, which is, I think, and I've been going on about this. Of course, you could say the number one thing is to be a winning team and win trophies and all the rest of it. We'll come back to that, of course.
Yeah.
But only one team a year can win the league. Only one team can win the FA Cup. Only one team can win the League Cup. How you then go about playing your football, for which people are paying a huge amount of money for the privilege to watch you, I think is important. First and foremost, try and be an attractive football team. Secondly, of course, with that, it's the club's DNA, whether you like it or not. Since Arthur Rowe and the 1951 title-winning team, because I'm not old enough to remember any such thing, through the double team, through Keith Birkinshaw's teams, through the 87 team with David Pleat, through to some of Maurizio Pochettino's teams, that is the DNA of the club. And so that's what I wanted to see come back. And we've got that. So let's say that already, let's get it right, that I'm in a much better place than I was. The problem for Spurs fans, I think, or at least for this Spurs fan, is we're walking a tightrope at the moment. Statistically, you can prove by the matrices that the coaches tend to like to use, possession, touches in the opposition box, the things I'm talking about, XG, threats on goal, all that stuff. Spurs were, until a couple of weeks, until the debacle at Brighton, the best team in the Premier League. Now they're the second best team behind Manchester City. And yet they've made their worst start for a decade. And it's that tightrope, that balance that's causing me a bit of pain at the moment. I think I can see the direction of travel, but you can't prove it with points on the board.
Danny,
and collapses like the one against Brighton, which are also part of the club's DNA, let's be frank, makes you sometimes think, five wins on spin, absolutely brilliant. Should have been 6. We could have put the whole business about our away form to bed by hanging on at Brighton or winning 6-0, and they didn't do it.
Have you been pleased, though, with what you've seen under Postecoglou? Because, of course, last season, finishing 5th, it looked at one point that we were going to secure that Champions League spot, but, of course, ended up finishing 5th. So far this season, there has been a lot of criticism aimed at Ange Postecoglou. Is that fair, in your opinion?
I think, a lot of criticism is a phrase. Where's it coming from? We all know that those of us like myself who live in social media and electronic media, you too, Chris, it's not the real world. Their opinions are extremely violent, extremely polarized. You're either one thing or the other. It's black and it's white and it's barcode. I think the truth, it lies in the middle here. I've got to be honest. I want the team to play attacking football, and they are doing that. They're getting plenty of goals and all the rest of it. But football is comprised of 2 parts: what you do with and without the ball. And Spurs are at the moment still, I think, pretty vulnerable without the ball. And I think that they are not getting the rewards a lot of their football deserves, because they still have vulnerabilities that the manager, in public at least, seeks not to address. He says, we're going to do what we're going to do. I'm sure I'm praying that away from those statements, he's doing something about it. Give you an example. We played really well at Leicester. We played really well at Newcastle. We played really well at Brighton. We got 1 point.
Yeah.
That is not good. And it's no point in saying we're the better team in all of those games. Because, of course, any team can have a kerfuffle. Any team can lose a game they should be winning. That's the beauty of football. But you could argue that is a pattern. And it's very hard to keep believing in the process when the evidence of your own eyes is that there are weaknesses that either are not being addressed or are being addressed and not solved. So I'm not for tearing the house down. I am for obviously carrying on with an experiment that has seen us transformed in terms of how we play, and now we need to match that transformation to results.
Danny, so
I'm picking my words really carefully here because you get slaughtered no matter what you say.
I know you do. Let me go down the route of social media first, because of course Brennan Johnson came off. We'll talk about Brennan Johnson later in depth.
Yeah.
He came off social media. What do you make of social media? Because you're on it a lot. I'm on it a lot, but I block a lot of people. How do you find abuse on social media?
I mean, I'm not very sensitive to it, I must be honest, because to be frank, the way I have behaved in my sort of public life, I've had plenty of opinions to give out, and I've dished out plenty on football and music and everything else over the years. And I'm usually on programs, that are pretty interactive and knockabout. So I've kind of learned to look after myself. But I'm not Brennan Johnson. I'm not 22 years of age. And young people, I believe, they not only are they on social media all the time, and I am too, but they really believe that it's part of their lives.
Yeah.
Look, you can come on and you can call me anything you want. I might block you, I might mute you. I certainly won't take it to heart like some people, like Brennan seems to have done. I think it has coarsened the national discourse on everything, whether it's politics or even football. And there's a reason for that, isn't there? There's two reasons. One, 240 characters or 30 seconds of TikTok, whatever it is, does not allow for any nuance. You can't have an argument or a serious discussion about something. You just blam, you're stating your case. But the critical thing, and the thing that's really difficult about it, I think, is that you can't change your mind. Once you've said something on social media, if you change your mind about Ange Postecoglou, about the new album by X band or Dua Lipa, whoever it is, or the color of the dress you're planning to wear to your prom, if you change your mind, you are destroyed. It's ridiculous. Human beings change their mind all the time because new evidence becomes available, new facts emerge, to quote Marquis Smith. And the problem is that people just go back to when you said something 16 months ago, 16 years ago, and say, "Ha, you changed your mind. You're an idiot." Ha. It's pathetic, really, because we all should have more patience with each other. And also let's be truthful. There are a lot of people, most people on social media, I find are as good as gold. They brought me information and fun, all kinds of good things into my life. There are loads of people out there, Chris, and I'm sure you've got a blister on the end of your finger from blocking them. They're there for a row. They're there to show, many of them, I suspect, broadcasting from inside the wardrobe of their mum's bedroom. They're there just to say, "Oh, you think this? Well, I think this." I'm no better than them, but I also don't have to put up with their bullshit,
Yeah.
I don't tend to block people very much. I'm almost fair game, but I do think it's much, much harder for younger folk. And by that, of course, I mean young footballers. They've grown up in a world where their every move, motivation, and idea is either, liked or disliked by their peers, and it must be very, very. I'm full of pressure, and
Danny, there's facts and stats published before games, after games, during games. Do you think that the fans in particular, I know a lot of pundits do it, but do you think the fans criticise players too much?
They're entitled to it. Then look, I said at the top of the show, you're entitled to support the club whatever way you want. So if you want to be, individually critical of individual players or the team or the manager, or if you want to be overly enthusiastic and sort of Pollyanna-ish and seeing things through navy blue tinted glasses, I mean, that's all fine. I think there is the issue for me is we've all become much more informed about football. It's inevitable. There used to be highlights of a few games on the telly. Now every game is televised and analysed to the nth degree. You've got the kind of stats that come out from FIFA and other games, we show everything about a player before that you even see them take to the field. The problem, I think, is the knee-jerk of it all. I'm as guilty as anyone. I really am. On the podcast I do, on the Beautiful Lane, I can get caught up in the moment. And Brennan Johnson, I guess, would be, again, a very good example. Literally, and I was, what is this lad doing out there on the wing? What is he bringing to this team? Why are we playing in this way that to accommodate wide players when he can't do this and that? Suddenly he scores 6 goals on a spin, and I can see it all. The problem is with social media, it's not any problem with, with it per se or the people who use it. It is the lack of perspective that it tends to bring to the thing. It's really good at instant reaction, really bad at any kind of zoomed out perspective.
Danny, if I can go back to talking about Ange Postecoglou, do you like the way that he plays? Do you like the way that he sets up? What do you think about high line? What did you think of his appointment? Because, the last time you were on, as you mentioned, Antonio Conte was our manager. Going back to, the summer before last when Ange was actually appointed, what were your thoughts?
Do you know, there weren't many of them because I didn't know much about how he would do in the Premier League. I'd saw his work, particularly at Celtic, obviously, and they played. It was hard to judge what was happening at Celtic because, let's be frank, the standard in the Scottish Premiership is, probably somewhere in the English Championship. Most of the teams they were playing succumbed to Celtic's possession football, to the inverted fullbacks, and to their high line absolutely easily because they had no answer to it. I like the fact that I like the way he talks mostly. And again, there are parts of it when he's staring at his shoes and being slightly snitty with a journalist about the question. I could live without that. But, he's talked about wanting to attack the opposition, wanting to dominate the ball, wanting to dominate the game. Of course, why wouldn't he? And that's been really good. The issues, what you asked me about directly, the high line, well, the high line works for some of the best teams in the world. Manchester City, you'll suddenly see them with their 3 centre-backs, if that's the way they're playing on that day, all 20 yards inside their own half. The high line has been okay for Spurs. It's been a lot of work for Van de Ven and Christian Romero. The inverted fullbacks, I think there was too much made about that at the start. It's a thing that teams have been doing since time immemorial, although Spurs are very committed to it, and it was fun to watch other teams trying to work it out. So I've got no problem with the individual parts of it. It's how it works, isn't it? And for me, the issue has been that we don't have a natural number 6. And I think this system, against good teams, and not with all due respect, St Mirren, you need somebody to stay at home properly. Now, I don't mean they have to be stood there like a lemon between the 2 centre-backs, but you need somebody who is defensively responsible because it's nothing to do with Spurs' system. It's to do with the quality of Premier League coaches and Premier League players. If they see a weakness, they're like sharks. They will just go, okay, Spurs got their fullbacks up the pitch. Look, the example, we've done it over the last 10 years to Manchester City. The advanced position of Kyle Walker or whoever else, João Cancelo, whoever's playing right back for Manchester City, has been a weakness for Manchester City against Spurs because they have Son. And we have exploited it absolutely ruthlessly. And the same thing will happen to Spurs in the way they're set up. The problem for me at the moment is that they don't have a player who's a natural 6. Bentancur is an 8, brilliant player when the ball's at his feet, but he's not naturally defensive. Madassar is a kind of box-to-box player. And Bissouma, who's probably the best suited to that, in his recent games in the AFCON, not only did he captain Mali, but he played up front. He was in their front 3. He is not a natural 6 either. And if you think about the season at Brighton that he had, after we bought him, where he did play quite deep, prior to that, he played much further forward. So I like the way we're playing. I do think it's very, very difficult to think of another way with the personnel we have. I've tried, when I was really getting, after every defeat, you natural human beings, you think, how could we have done better? And there's a part of me that wants to play a back 3. Now, he's never going to do that. But there's a part of me that wants to play Dragoshin to the right of Romero with Van de Ven on the left. The problem with that is you end up picking a team, and I've done it, I could probably show you the notes. You end up picking a team that doesn't either leaves out Maddison or Kulusevski. And in one particular evening, I must have been at the Red Wine, I picked a team without Maddison or Kulusevski in it. And so suddenly you're a much more stable team, but all the creativity's gone out of it, you know. So it's tricky. But look, it's not about how Spurs play, because they're clearly getting lots of possession, lots of touches in the opposition box, lots of attacking, and that's great. It's how the opposition respond to it as well. They have a right. Every opposition has the right to respond to Spurs, and it's how Spurs in turn deal with that. And you could argue they've had a pretty good defensive record until the second half of Brighton. After the second half of Brighton, they looked like they had packed it. No, that's not the right word. They'd collapsed under the pressure. And you know, it's when things don't go your way, when you're not getting 65% possession, when you're not having lots of touch in the opposition box, it's how they respond then that I think is still to be sorted out at the club.
Danny, you've kind of touched a little bit on what I was going to ask you next about has Ange Postecoglou got the right players, or does he need more, or is it about his system? Where do you think the issue is?
Well, all managers, look, all failed generals after every lost battle. If I had one more tank battalion, I'd have been fine. So Spurs have got, you know, he's got many of the players there now are his own players, not all of them, of course. I don't know, you know, if you had the 11 best players in the world, the system would be fine, wouldn't it? So yes, the answer must be they probably need some different players. I think they do need a holding midfielder, and I'm going to use that word, makes me sound like a dinosaur and all the rest of it. They need somebody who, and with a bit of character, who can anchor the team when the opposition have the ball, because we're pretty good without the ball. Sorry, with the ball, we're pretty good. And when Solanke gets settled in, I think we'll be even better. And so the issue, if there is one, and, you know, I'm not saying we have to go defensive, because I didn't like it under Mourinho. I didn't like it under Nuno. I didn't like it under Conte. So there's a lesson for me there. You know, and I grew up in the 70s when teams kicked lumps at each other to get a 0-0 draw, you know. They need a bit more stability, and that may be another player that they need there. The rest of it, look, let's be honest about it. We criticised the defenders after the game in Brighton. Last season, when they finished fifth, you could argue that Spurs' top 5 players were the back 4 and the goalkeeper. You know, they're all clearly very, very good players and very, very good characters. Vicario, everyone has their problems, has got to sort out this thing with the set pieces. What we all do is we get through a half where it doesn't happen. We go, they're sorted out now, Spurs. And then it'll happen again. Now, the really interesting thing for me was watching him play in his hometown of Udine during the week for Italy against Israel. Italy won 4-1. It was his competitive debut for Italy, and Israel's goal was a mess. A corner swung in underneath the crossbar, went directly in, while Vicario, who I adore as a shot stopper, was wrestling with one player who was vaguely obstructing him. Now, it was a foul, but they're not given anymore in football. Those fouls are not given. So he's got to do something about it. He's got to be more physical. He's got to demand one of his teammates comes and be more physical, whatever it is. Because, I mean, we all know penalties are not given for goalkeepers pushing and shoving forwards. The last time one was Jens Lehmann on Robbie Keane at Spurs, where I think the Metropolitan Police had decided that what they would like would be a draw in that game. And Lehmann threw Keane into the back of the net. The penalty honours even on the day. He's got to do something about it, because, and the interesting thing for me was, whereas I forgive him in a Spurs shirt, I'm kind of going, oh, but he's such a nice bloke and he's a really good shot stopper, you know, and he looks the way he comes out of his goal and all that. Once you see it in another shirt, in this case, an Italian shirt, you think, boy, that bloke's got a problem. But, you know, the defenders are all really good. Brandon Johnson has yet, I'm loving this run he's on. He's yet to convince you that he's a £50 million footballer, but he has the potential so to be. Son is a player we have to watch carefully. He is a great servant to Spurs, fantastic footballer. Not sure he should be captain, but that's a separate issue. You have to be careful to make sure that he's properly fit for every game now, because clearly when he's not, he struggles a little bit. Solanke is a good buy, and not least because of the way he leads the press. So I don't think it's the system. I think we may need. I'll ask you, Chris. Do you understand what Spurs' midfield triumvirate are supposed to be? Because I that's where I struggle at the moment. Maddison, creative. Kulusevski, a bit of muscle and creative. And then somebody plays at 6. But you could interplace all the sort of 5 or 6 players who play in that position, and you still never say that's a perfect midfield, would you?
I think it was like 20, 26, 27 combinations last year. And that was.
And there's a reason for that, isn't there? There's a reason. None of them are quite perfect, the combinations.
Well, there is that. There is that. But then, of course, I think it's fair and, to add a bit of balance for Postecoglou that I don't think he's had a fully fit and available squad for any game during his whole time at Spurs.
Yes, and I tell you what that reminds me of. Every other Premier League manager. Nobody has a completely fit squad. That's a dream, a pipe dream, a chimera. But I take your point. You can have more important players than others missing. That's granted. They play too much. The pitches are getting harder and harder. We're getting more and more of those sorts of injuries. But I take your point. Yeah.
Danny, what have you made of the transfer windows under Postecoglou? Because that's another point I was going to bring up, that he doesn't want to sign sometimes household names, big players, big mega stars that perhaps some of us fans want. And also what I wanted to ask you, and I think we touched on this the last time you were on, the last time I really got excited about signing was back in '94 when we bought Klinsmann. Who was the last signing where you got really excited?
Wow, you're pressing me here because nobody knew. I mean, I do a European football show, so I knew Romero had a good season. Van der Ven had a good season at Wolfsburg, but
I mean, when you're literally going, wow.
Oh no, I'm trying to think back to when the last time I was absolutely wowed by a signing. And I like you, I can't remember. And this is where, again, on social media, you're either ENIC in or ENIC out. I'm neither of those things. I think ENIC done lots of good things for the club. I think they could do a lot of things better. I think the recent decision about ticketing and old people is a disgrace. But I think there's an issue there, and this is the issue. And maybe Postecoglou and even Maurizio before him, Pochettino, were involved with this. Spurs spend plenty of money on footballers. They've got lots of £40 million plus players in that squad. Some of them, of course, in Ndombele have proved to be a disaster. Lo Celso just did not get going at Spurs. There's £100 million worth of footballers. What they don't do is sign players who are earning big wages. They're happy to pay 50 million for Brennan Johnson because he's not yet earning superstar wages. And I think that may be the back of the problem, whether it's probably Daniel Levy. The famous Spurs have got the best revenue to wages figures in the Premier League. Well, there's no trophy for that, is there? And whether Postecoglou is adding to that now by wanting to bring in players that he can develop, rather than having to deal with the kind of problems that perhaps that superstar players might bring, is open to question. We saw. I've got to be careful how I say this because I don't want to make everybody else vomit. Arsenal's rise at the moment, the most important thing that he did is not bringing in Manchester City's fringe players because they'd won things. It's not developing Saliba away from. The first thing he did was to get rid of the really, really hugely paid superstars who were doing nothing there. Aubameyang and the rest of them. So there was an example as well that they're not necessarily the solution to any problem. I just think Spurs may have to, whether the owner likes it or not, may have to up their wages game to buy the kind of players that will make the huge change to take you. Look, if you're 17th in the Premier League and you spend X amount of money, you can go up 5 places. The same X won't take you from 5th to 4th or 3rd. It's X times 3 between wages and transfer fees. The investment needed to make those leaps is much bigger. And I wonder sometimes whether Spurs are prepared to do that.
Danny, what have you made of the recruitment, though, since Postecoglou has walked through the door? Have you been impressed with that? Because it has certainly been better, behind the scenes, because a lot has changed behind the scenes as well as on the pitch since Postecoglou has arrived.
It actually predates Postecoglou, doesn't it? We'll come on to Postecoglou in a second. Things have improved in recent times. You know, the two centre-backs are clearly brilliant finds. The goalkeeper, notwithstanding what I said about him, sort of behaving like a butterfly at corners, Udogie, Porro, you know, all these players, Kulusevski, Bentancur, these are all pretty much upgrades on some of the players we had. More recently, there's been a change, hasn't there? We've paid proper money for potential. And so it's harder to judge whether Bergvall, Archie Gray, and the rest are going to be transformative or not. It was great to get Archie Gray, but somewhat sooner or later he's going to have to play in the Premier League team to be worth the kind of dough Spurs have laid out for him. If anything, we've doubled down on bringing in. I mean, Solanke notwithstanding. Let's be fair to everybody. We've doubled down on bringing in young players with huge potential, and hoping that the large fees we pay for them will A, be reflected out on the pitch eventually, and B, of course, because that's the way football is working towards now, that they will have a resale value that makes them look cheap in the long run. They did look. Let's be frank. I find myself circumnavigating the issue here. Spurs, with the exception of Solanke, did not improve the first 11 last summer, and it needed improving.
Are you surprised then, Danny, that we didn't buy players for the now? I know I get the fact that we're buying players for the future, and it is exciting for the future. But players for now, you know, many fans were saying that they would like to see the likes of Eze walk through the door in the summer. And another question for you: what do you think that what have Spurs done enough to do this season? What are your expectations this season with this squad?
Look, the answer to the first question is they I think they needed two or three oven-ready Premier League top 6 players, whether they came from within the Premier League or without, because by buying young players, you're repeating a process whereby you're waiting for people to improve so that you can improve as a group, and allowing for the fact that, you know, good coaching will also help you along. The trouble is, if that means that for a half a season or a season you stay still, you are banjacks in the Premier League. Everybody else is trying so hard to improve. I'm not saying Spurs aren't trying, but the plan they use leaves you susceptible to standing still. And if you stand still, you're doomed. Teams will just come and devour you. I mean, the Premier League is not sometimes as beautiful to watch as what goes on in Spain. But what is true about it is that I don't think, with the exception of that rotten Derby team and one or two of Sheffield United's performances last season, I don't think there isn't an easy point to be got in the Premier League anymore. Everybody has got 25, 28 good professional players who've had top coaching since they were 10 years of age in academies. They've got coaching staffs of 10, 12, 15 to try and sort out their own problems and to pick on the weaknesses of the other teams. It is incredibly difficult to get points. They have to be clawed, as I sometimes say, at the cold, hard ground. And so standing still is not an option. And I worry sometimes with Spurs that at the very top of the club, they can see the cash registers increasing all the time. These brilliant deals that they do and all the rest of it, and go-karting and all the rest of it. Is it being reflected in proper progress on the pitch, or are they waiting for a brilliant coach to come along, Postecoglou, previously Pochettino, to take the players, the material they've provided with, and to somehow transform them magically into something better? They pulled the trick off once with Pochettino. My argument about that would be that's very unlikely to be repeated very easily in something as competitive as the Premier League. What was your other question, Chris?
Well, what do you think this squad is good enough for, and what do you think what would progression be? Getting fourth spot, is that progression for you?
Look, I was asked this question on my own. Sorry, I asked myself this very question and the others on the View from the Lane podcast at the start of the season. And other people were saying they'll finish fourth. You know, that was about the standard reply. I said I had to tell my own truth. Looking at that Spurs squad, and this is before a ball had been kicked, and the way Ange sets out to play, which is commendable, very exciting, and open to attack by opposition coaches. I genuinely didn't know whether they'd finish 3rd or 8th. Right now, of course, they're 10th, so I'd settle for 8th. No, I wouldn't. I had no idea, and I have no idea where they're going to finish. If you, as I say, if you go and outplay the opposition in 3 away games and come away with 1 point, that suggests one thing. If you believe the sports scientists that if you keep on running up those kinds of stats and XGs, that they will come, it will be transformed into wins, then there's another outcome available. I think the form of Chelsea, where suddenly their £200 million midfield pivot has started to perform behind, 6 extraordinary forwards. The people they're bringing off the bench is extraordinary. That's worrying. If you accept that one North London club and Manchester City and Liverpool are going to be occupying 3 of those spots, I would say to you, Chris, it's just as likely that Spurs' best way into next season's Champions League, if that's progression, is to come through winning the Europa League as it is to finish 4th. I think one is as likely as the other.
Let's go down that route. Let's talk about the Europa League because, of course, Postecoglou has made a lot of changes in the game so far this season. At what point does he start to go strongest possible 11?
Oh, not for a long time yet. This tournament, which has been expanded as the Champions League has, you now have to win. Somebody help me. You have to get through 19 games to win this. If you and maybe if you go into the qualification round after this first league, maybe even more. I think he's made lots of changes, and we got the 2 results. One of them pretty convincing, one of them less so, but the results were very important. With those 2 wins under your belt, and particularly the away win, it shouldn't be beyond the wit of Spurs to win their remaining home games. And I suspect that, because no one knows yet what the figure is, we all knew the magical figure in the Champions League group stages was 10. Who knows what it is now? But I suspect win your home games and 1 away win in those 8 matches will get you into the top 8. That's my guess. And then you get 2 games off, and you don't have to go into qualification. But equally, if you stack up the points at this end of the process, and Spurs got 6 from 6, you can take a couple of games off towards the end of the process, depending again on what turns out to be the likely points totals. So I think I think the team has done very well to get the 6 points they got, and we'll see where they go from there. The tournament itself, I think, is wide open and pure this year because they're not parachuting in some losers out of the Champions League. And I don't make Spurs favourites for it. They are favourites with the bookmakers, but that's because people like me and you think Spurs are great and put our fiver on, each way on Spurs. But there's no reason why they can't go deep into that tournament.
Danny, talking about the League Cup as well.
Yeah.
Of course, we made a lot of changes again. Or not we, Postecoglou made a lot of changes again, as he did last year against Fulham. Frustrated a lot of fans because the cup competitions mean a hell of a lot to us because we haven't won one for so long. Does that frustrate you? The fact that
managers just won't learn. They convince themselves that because you've got a squad of expensively assembled and expensively paid players, you should be able to put those players out. We put out a team that we believe can win the match. Really? Well, experience shows that the other team will look at a weakened Spurs side and say, we can have these. Spurs were lucky to get through, and thank goodness for Jed Spence. That may turn out to be one of the most important goals, and I'm delighted he signed a new contract. I know people question his attitude, but I think there's a footballer in there, proper footballer. And I dare say the latest round of mischievous comments coming out of Pedro Porro's agent about Real Madrid has quickened, accelerated that negotiation. Look, the League Cup is really important. The last trophy we won is the League Cup. I was as excited that day at Wembley, of course it helped that it was Chelsea, as if Spurs had won the Champions League. I was, and I would be again. And it's not about me because I was lucky enough to grow up at a time when Spurs were winning trophies regularly. But for the younger Spurs fans, probably can't afford to go to the stadium even, to cement their passion for the club, it would be great if they could win something. And the League Cup is at least within Spurs' grasp. And I thought Ange took a real risk with that team he picked. He didn't learn his lesson from the previous season, and we were within a couple of minutes of coming a cropper. But we didn't, and you need a certain amount of luck in football, in life. certainly in cup competitions. And of course, the draw then said, "All right, well, you see how you get on with this lot. We shall see what kind of team puts out against Manchester City."
Were you surprised, Danny? Only a couple of weeks ago, the fans forum took place, and Daniel Levy pretty much said that we have too many games. So it was kind of an explanation why Postecoglou has chosen a weakened team in the League Cup. It's like they want to just get rid of the League Cup. But now we face Premier League champions Manchester City at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in a couple of weeks' time. How would you approach that game?
I'd put out the strongest team and try and win it, because the prize is twofold, isn't it? You progress in a tournament where Spurs would be among the favourites, and you take out the best team in the tournament. You've got the advantage of a home tie. How many times will you get the opportunity where one game takes Manchester City out of the equation? Doesn't happen in the Premier League.
Yeah.
So you've got a chance to do it. I would play the Spurs' strongest team. I'm sure City don't have a weak team really, but they won't have their absolutely strongest team out. And, for Daniel Levy to say we play too much football, this is the man who sanctioned a match in Australia 48 hours after the end of the season. So a little bit of shut up there, mate, isn't it?
Danny, talking about Daniel Levy, you've mentioned him earlier on in the podcast. What have you made of his time at Spurs? And what does he need to do differently? And also what I wanted to ask you about the Amanda Staveley situation, about putting in £500 million. Would you like to see that happen?
It would depend on where the £500 million has come from. I can't be a hypocrite. I was gritted teeth and toes curled when Newcastle were taken over by the Saudi Arabian investment organization. It's because, I'll come back to the politics of that. Daniel Levy, by most measures, has done fantastically well. Spurs are now, from where he was, where he took it over, they're a global player. They're a global name.
Yeah.
People in far-flung corners of the globe know who Spurs are. Their kit and emblem is everywhere, both available and seen. They're talked about. But we knew all this before he took over. Spurs is a huge club. It is a brilliant and huge football club in one of the great football cities of the world. So if the measure is commercial impact, cultural impact, then he's done really well. And there is a but there, isn't there? Football is also I know it's a business now. I get that. I'm not a Luddite. It's still about success on the pitch. And half of that is playing brilliant football, because why else would you want somebody paying 90 quid to watch you for 97 minutes? And it isn't even necessarily about winning trophies. Trophies are very hard to win in England because you've got 11 of the richest 20 clubs in the world in one league. But you've got to be going deep into tournaments. You've got to be challenging 6 or 7 points off the top of the table. You can't be a kind of mid-table hanging about version of yourselves if you're pretending to be this great big global club. Spurs are not pretending, they are that, but that has to be reflected on the pitch. And I wonder whether what Daniel Levy needs to do is to let the reins go out of his own hands a little bit. I'm not suggesting that has to be someone else taking over the club, but he's done what he has done over the past 20-odd years, 25 years, 24 years. It's a long time, isn't it? He's done two things. He's made himself incredibly rich. He's one of the highest paid sports administrators in the world, and his shares, his ownership of the club has gone up by exponentially. So he's made himself very, very wealthy. What he hasn't done is translated that into a powerful football team to match the powerful football club. And that's the next thing he's got to do. And my suspicion is he may have to let somebody else manage the pounds, shillings and pence to fully unleash the potential of the club.
Danny, we all know as fans that top four means an awful lot to the club itself in terms of revenue for Champions League football. Now, if Spurs were needing the points in the Premier League to get that fourth spot, but we were still in the Europa League, what do you think the club would prioritise?
As I said, as you get toward, if we were lucky enough to get towards that part of the season where we were still, let's say in the semi-final of the Europa League and 2 points off fourth place, both are rooting to this. Fourth place means nothing, does it? Except when it means, you know, qualification for the Champions League. And qualification for a tournament you don't intend to win is meaningless as well. All that is another way of saying we're going to collect up as much money as we can. So while I understand how important it is to the club and maybe to supporters to be in the Champions League, but look, we want to be in the Champions League, okay? It's a huge ambition. And yet when Spurs found themselves one of the names penciled into the Super League, the fans didn't want it at all. So clearly being part of this super elite European tournament, in theory, it's a brilliant thing. But when we were offered it literally on a plate, we were outside the ground, quite rightly, protesting and saying, we'll burn the thing down rather than let it start, you know? So go for the glory and win the Europa League to get in the Champions League if we got to that lucky place where we had that choice.
Danny, a lot of the younger fans, I find, it's always about the top four. But I take it with you, it's all about the trophies.
No, I mean, I say they've been brought up in a world where, you know, we talk about goal scoring records and forget that people scored goals before the Premier League existed. They've been brought up in a world where the Champions League is the be all and end all. But you have to be careful. The Premier League has gone a long way to destroying football in this country. The pyramid is not as powerful as it used to be. We've seen clubs like Bury and others go to the wall because all the money is sucked up into one tournament. The Champions League, if it was let, will do exactly the same thing. Its new model is really the Super League without the guaranteed qualification. So in that way, Spurs got the worst of all possible worlds. They've got the same tournament that they were looking to be in, but they're not guaranteed to be in it. So the young people, of course, they are entitled to support the club exactly as they want to, and they're under pressure because of the way football is presented by the media to think that if you don't qualify for the Champions League, that's the be all and the end all. That's the club failing. They need to remember that they're in a very competitive league with a lot of very rich football clubs. I'd like Spurs to be in the Champions League too, because I like the Knights under the lights playing these great teams. But I would also be very, very keen for them to win the Europa League.
Danny, going back to the situation where Daniel Levy has come out and said a number of times that they want investment. Amanda Staveley, it has been reported a number of times by media outlets that, you know, she could possibly put in £500 into the football club. If that
more than that, I could put £500 in.
500 million.
Yeah.
If that was to happen, do you think that would work? Because she seems to be very hands-on.
I don't know. What would they do with the £500 million? What's it for? They've got a brilliant stadium. They've got a brilliant training ground. What do they plan to do with the £500 million? I've no idea. This is never made known to us, the fans. You know, in the pubs and clubs, people will be saying, "Yeah, we're going to spend it all on players." And Spurs had last summer all that headroom in the financial fair play. I don't know what they would do with the 500 million. Would they go out and buy 5 superstar players? Nothing has happened in the last 25 years suggests that they might, right? So, and then would she be in charge? Would she take control? I can't see Daniel Levy sanctioning that either. So while she definitely, from what I gather, is very keen to invest in Spurs, it's not quite the straightforward takeover that it was at Newcastle. But let me ask you, what do you think they would do with 500 million quid if they got it Spurs? Build more hotels?
Well, that's still a project ongoing. But certainly, Danny, I would hope that we would sign a couple of superstar players. But with Postecoglou in charge now, we know that he doesn't sign those types of players. And it's funny because every expert or journalist that I've had on that have followed Postecoglou's career very, very closely, they always say to me that this has happened everywhere he's gone. He doesn't sign superstars. He signs players that he identifies that can do a job for him, which is great. But, you know, the fans want superstars. That is all about the fans with the superstars, I feel. Let's come on to the leaders, because you mentioned about Heung-min Son earlier. You questioned about whether you would have him as the captain. Who would you have as captain?
Well, what I'm about to say will appear insane. I'd probably have Romero as captain, bearing in mind that he is as liable to do something daft himself, although he's been a little bit more controlled and he's not had a great start to the season. But I think part of that is whether he's been unsettled by Real Madrid, of course, who are the kings of unsettling, but more likely he's won his second successive international tournament with the Argentinian side winning the Copa America. He's had very little rest. And so, but I think I'd rather the team was led from the back or the middle rather than the front. I think Son has got an awful lot on his plate anyway. But of course, he's the senior player. He's universally liked by everybody. So I can see why he's the captain. He's just if he has one of those days where the ball doesn't stick and where he can't beat his man, he can't lead by example. He's certainly not going to lead by fist clenching, is he? Now, fist clenching only goes so far as well. I suppose I'd have Romero as the captain.
Who are the other leaders, though, Danny? Because particularly, less than 2 weeks ago when we lost to Brighton, you go on social media and so many people are saying, we've got no leaders. Who are the leaders in your opinion?
I'm not sure I know what they mean by that. I think I do. It's a team game. Of course, you need people to be strong under fire. And I think, Van der Ven gives me the impression that he will become what we call a traditional leader. But the latest person added to the leadership group is the goalkeeper, who is causing the defenders to have kittens at set pieces. Now, I understand he's a great bloke, and I like him. I love what he does, except underneath the crossbar. Teams that do well, leaders emerge. You can't just put out people and say he's a leader or she's a leader, and there's your new team. And there's different kinds of leadership, isn't there? Solanke looks to me like when he's up to full fitness, the way he plays without the ball is a form of leadership, isn't it? It's saying to everyone else, this press is going to be high, it's going to be fast, and it's going to be now. And if you don't follow me, we're going to come disjointed. And I like that. I mean, I don't know what the Spurs triggers are. I'm not there for the training sessions. Ryan Mason, whoever else is doing it. But Solanke's determination to make the press not just real, but really, really intense, I think that's great. And that's a form of leadership too. The answer to your question is, though, I'm not sure that the game is in a place anymore where having 4 Roy Keanes on the pitch is the answer, because those people don't exist. You're not allowed to play like that anymore.
That's very, very true. Danny, the $1 million question here. Can Ange Postecoglou improve Timo Werner's finishing?
Well, the answer has to be yes, because it's so bad at the moment I could improve it. But watch me improve his finishing. You point towards the goal. You see the round thing over there, Timo? Look, he's got to the point now where I think it's the equivalent of the yips, isn't it? That you get in golf, where you stand over the putt and you literally can't make the correct motion because you're so nervous about the outcome. Let's be truthful about him. Now, he's getting all the jip now because people want Mikey Moore in the team in the absence of Son, and I totally understand that. And Moore got another brilliant goal for the England 21s the other day, incidentally, coming in through the left side of the team. Timo Werner's done okay, I think. He's found space a lot, and his pace allows him to find space behind teams. A million years ago, when the earth was young and dinosaurs ruled the earth, Sir Alf Ramsey, no less a player, and of course a Spurs man, said that taking of chances is the great mystery of life. I mean, it was a bit mystical for me. And I don't understand this thing about confidence, but you look at Brendan Johnson, you can see it's true with footballers. I don't know why it has to be confidence. They train. Training is training. The training that goes on in football came out of the military. That if you repeat an action often enough, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to reflex it. You just do it, right? The cost of not doing it was you might get your head shot off. Footballers train and train and train and train, and yet they still rely on confidence. There should be no confidence in it. You should be so competent at what you do that it becomes automatic, second nature, muscle memory. And yet footballers still have to have confidence. Comes and goes. Brennan had none, now he's got loads. Timo had some, and now he's got none. It's a comical question to end with. I do think that if Timo Werner played every game between now and the end of the season, he'd probably end up on the thick end of double figures in goals. The problem is he's not going to play every game, and so forth. It's even more important than what chances he gets. he actually gets the ball over the line. He's not doing it yet. And probably the answer here is hypnotism. Just imbue confidence in him, artificial if we have to.
I think he's a very hard-working player, but he does need to improve his finishing 100%. Just a very
But he's 28 years of age. How is he going to improve it, Chris?
I cannot believe some of these misses. I thought it was a very clever signing on loan last season. And then I changed my mind about keeping him in that Newcastle away game, which, of course, we got thumped at St James's. Very quick question for you, Danny.
Yes.
Richarlison, keep or sell?
I think if he was fit enough and we got a big enough offer, I'd move him on. He had that lovely spell, didn't he, in the middle of last season where he got goal after goal after goal.
Yeah.
He's not going to get a game on the left-hand side because Spurs want Son to play there. Eventually, Mikey Moore will play there. I suppose he's a backup to Solanke, but he's a very expensive backup, and you could do better.
Danny, let's finish on talking about Thomas Tuchel, of course, earlier today. What a day to get you on the podcast because, of course, he has been a New England boss, take over in January. What do you make of this appointment? Is there any part of you disappointed that we have a German head coach in charge of England?
No, not in the slightest. Not that, it would be better. It would be better.
Yeah,
of course. People they're driven on by the back page of the Daily Mail and things, printing the word German in capital letters. I do understand how important the Second World War was for us all. It's a long time ago now, and Germany is a very different place in a different world. It would be better if it was an English coach, only because it would prove that English coaches were coming through the so-called pathway. But if you only have to look abroad, I mean, there are 2 in France currently. English coaches are just not in demand. We are not at the place where Portugal, Netherlands, Spain are, where they're churning out coaches who people think can make a real difference to their football club. That's something for English football to either navel gaze about or, as we do really, let's be honest about it, continue to look at the money pouring into the game and say, I'm worried about that. Everyone's making a fortune. We don't need to worry about that. I've got no problem. Let's turn it on its head. It is arguable that Thomas Tuchel is the best qualified person ever to take the job as England manager. He's won more than maybe Capello, but he's at a different place. Capello was already, I think, looking for the gates of the retirement home. Tuchel is still at the peak of his powers. I think it's a fantastic appointment. I also think the FA needs to grow up and not try. We talked to 10 other managers. No, you didn't. 3 days ago, it was going to be Lee Carsley. We didn't speak to Harry Kane. Of course you spoke to Harry Kane. Don't try and make mugs of us. Look, Tuchel is a complicated guy, and he tends to fall out with people, but he tends to win things as well. And I think I just don't see it as a problem. I think he's the best qualified manager England have ever had, and if that's reflected with them finally getting themselves across the line. The problem is the next big tournament is the World Cup, and that's going to be in 100 degrees of heat. It's wide open. Anyone can win it because anyone can lose a game in those conditions, as we saw in the tournament there in last summer.
Danny, very last question for you. Will Postecoglou be successful at Tottenham and lift the trophy before he leaves?
That's 2 questions, isn't it? You're suggesting with the question that winning a trophy is success, yes?
I think so. When you've got that flag sitting behind you, 16 long years and counting.
Oh, don't remind me. Don't remind me.
It's got to be success. Is that not your definition of success?
Well, I must admit, I fall back on, are we going to play some great football? And hopefully success will come from that. I'm going to say yes. They've got some very talented footballers there, particularly in cup competitions. You need a bit of luck. And I suspect that they've got 3 chances this season. They've got players who are improving because they were young when we signed them. Why not is my answer to you. Can I see Son Heung-min holding a trophy above his head? Sorry, first of all, I saw him there. He was wearing Korean kit. Yeah, of course. Why not? Why not? We're a great club. Why wouldn't we win something? The not winning stuff is the outlier. It's not the nature. People, Chiellini, it's Tottenham, and Spurs and all that. This is an outlier. This is the longest spell they've gone without a trophy since the dawn of, since the middle of the the 20th century. This is not typical. This is atypical. What we have to do as fans, what Levy has to do as the owner, and what the players and coaching staff have to do is to make sure it doesn't become the fact of life, that this is put to bed as an outlier. This is the season to do it. Come on, you Spurs.
Danny, thank you so much. I'll tell you what, if you didn't give me a time limit on this podcast and recording for an hour, I'd probably keep you on here for 4 hours. Because
well, I've changed my mind now. We can go for 4 hours if we like. The issue is that my missus is away working in the UK, and the dog and both the cats are starting to scratch at the door to get fed. And that's true.
Well, let's not leave it 20 months before you come on here again.
That's fine with me, Chris. I say I love doing the other podcast. The View from the Lane is my baby, and I love it, and it wins awards and all the rest of it. But it's different. The good ones, you, me, and my colleagues, of course, and one or two others that you could name, they're different from each other. They bring a different slant, a different light is shone on the beautiful Spurs. They bring different kinds of, to use an overused word, passion. So I like to join in. I like to find out what's going on over the fence. And thank you for having me on. Really, thank you for letting me come on and say my piece. And of course, it won't be 20 months because something terrible will happen or something great will happen, preferably the latter. And you'll be gathering up the usual faces to have their say.
Well, hopefully we'll get your new flag behind you to put up.
Nothing would give me greater pleasure. I mean that. Unless Marvin Gaye came back to life, nothing would give me greater pleasure.
Well, Danny, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate you coming on. We've absolutely loved it, and the hour has flown by.
I've loved it too.
Where can people find you on social media? And
I'm Danny Kelly Words on Twitter. I don't do the other ones at the moment. Even though Twitter is a cesspit of hate, you can, with careful muting and stuff, you can still have good fun on there. So I'm Danny Kelly Words on Twitter. You can hear me on TalkSport Sunday nights, most Monday nights on Trans Europe Express and Kickoff. And you can go to your usual suppliers and get The View from the Lane, the podcast that I do, which I guess differs from others in that, the journalists I work with are kind of at Spurs every day. So it's a bit more measured than some. But I think I make up for that with my ridiculously over-emotional response to every result. Suddenly we're the best team in the world and I'm walking on air and the hat is on the side of my head. Or, as I say, I'm having been talked down by the fire brigade from a high vantage point. So, that's where you can find me.
Danny, thank you so much. And thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening. And we will
Thank you, everyone.
Come on, you Spurs.
Bless you and come on, you Spurs.
Thank you.